you have to keep moving forward. You have to keep your head high and you have to keep going, because at the end of the day, you're responsible for how things turn out for yourself. On the menu today at Sarah's Soju Cafe is yuja seltzer. So grab your mugs and let's chat about navigating and growing from change. Welcome back, Soju Shotties, to another episode of Soju with Sarah. I'm your residential Soju Shottie, Sarah, and welcome to this cozy corner on the internet. If this is your first time here, I hope you enjoy this episode. This is my personal safe space, and I hope it's a safe space for some of you guys too. This is also a place where we talk about reflections that we have about life, little tidbits of our every week, because we post every Friday, and just a place to reflect and learn more about ourselves. I always forget to reiterate like the mission statement of the podcast, but I feel like the deeper we go into the podcast, the more I'm realizing what exactly I want this podcast to be as well. So welcome. And if this is like your second, fourth, 100th time back on the podcast, thank you for coming back. I always love seeing familiar faces, especially when you guys comment, leave me DMs, and also just like write in general. So thank you guys for always being here and always showing up. And yeah, so let's get into today's episode. I have a little bit to talk about. I was also going to say, if you are not new to the podcast, then you probably noticed the backdrop is a little bit different. This is kind of the context for today's episode, actually, which is all about change. But we moved last week. It's actually been a couple of weeks. I haven't filmed in the new space yet. And so if you notice, it is a little bit bare bones. If you're seeing this set for the first time, you might not notice anything different or anything that looks unusual, but this is an absolutely new feeling for me to be filming in this new set. I've tried to retain like the main core elements of what we had in our past space, which was our living room, but it looks so bare, and bear with me because this will definitely keep evolving as we have more time to set up. I honestly was going through a little bit of a crisis like right before filming, because we just moved the sofa over to this wall of actually just a wall, but I've been so in my head about wanting to preserve the space and the feel of the podcast. So I had like a 2-hour mini crisis. And if I sound stuffy, it's because I was crying a little bit. But I think that just comes with the process of change and accepting that things are different. So this episode specifically, I hope encourages anyone who's going through change, anticipating life change, trying to navigate life change, to embrace the change and challenges that life throws onto you, and to really grow and learn from these experiences. I am definitely going through my own set of challenges and new experiences right now. But before we get into the episode, I do want to do our weekly drink of the day. I know it's in a not soju cup, but I totally didn't realize that the sparkling water that I was using was spiked sparkling water. I literally just saw sparkling water, but this should actually be in our soju cup, because today we have a mix of sparkling water spiked, which I guess it's just seltzer, and passion fruit yuja tea. So cheers. One of my goals for next year with Soju with Sarah is to release soju mugs for you guys, because I know some of you guys have asked in the past how you can get your own soju mug, and I would love to hand make everyone their own soju mug, but unfortunately I just cannot find the time to do that. But next year I want to figure out how I can get some of you guys soju mugs, so stay tuned. But let's get into the episode for today. So a couple of weeks ago, my boyfriend and I moved, and we moved cities actually, and it was a whole process. I'd been looking forward to moving for a couple of weeks now, and I was actually pretty excited. I was wanting some more space with the apartment. I wanted new changes in different directions with our life, because we've been living in our old apartment for 2.5 years, and I felt like it was a time for us to kind of evolve as a couple, but also move into a new space that would allow us to evolve as people. And so I was very excited, but then the week of moving rolled by, and I think just so many things went wrong, and I felt so beaten down by the process. And to kind of like laundry list it down, I might do a story time later with James for the intermission segment, but the laundry list is, it was such an insanely stressful move because it was raining the whole week. So it was wet and gross outside. But so many unlucky things happened, including our rental car breaking down and us having to commute 5 hours to go to an airport to pick up a rental car replacement. But on top of that, I think what really wore us down were all the apartment issues that we came into. And so there were so many things like rusty blades just lying around the apartment and exposed insulation, freshly finished flooring that was still sticky, and just so many random things that I have never experienced in a move. And I think it was just very overwhelming to take in because we were already having to relocate ourselves to a new city. And I feel like all my excitement for that experience got buried underneath this pool of worries and responsibilities and things we had to handle and tackle. And I think it's one of those things where the experience just didn't align with what I was expecting or anticipating. And it ended up being such a chaotic week of moving. I was also TMI on my period at that time. And so everything felt super emotional for me on top of grieving the quote unquote loss of our old apartment and a place that I felt was our home that we had built the last 2 years. And I know with every season of change and every period of change, there are gonna be moments where you feel sad and beaten down. I think this time especially, I just wasn't expecting all the feelings hitting me all at once. And so that was the general experience of moving. And I kind of talk about this on my vlog a little bit as well. I shut myself down for 2 weeks because I didn't want to talk to anyone. I didn't want to face reality. And I felt like there was just a looming thunderstorm over my head because quite literally it was like raining for 2 weeks. So it physically was a raining thunderstorm over my head. But I feel like I was just drenched in all this emotional turmoil. And as someone that preaches positivity and making light out of hard times, I felt like this was one of the moments in life where I really just couldn't bring myself out of this like dark hole that I was in. And I was also realizing that I hadn't been through change like this in a long period of time. But because I was mostly offline the last 2 weeks, I spent a lot of time meditating and reflecting on what went wrong, what my feelings were, like kind of just processing the emotions, because sometimes I'm so quick to share my emotions without actually thinking about why or how and why not. And so I did a lot of thinking the last 2 weeks, and I think there's some reflections that I wanted to share about change and going through change that might help any of you who might be going through a period of change. And if you hear any weird banging sounds, that is my heater, because the furnace in our new apartment is extremely loud. And so we'll sometimes get woken up in the middle of the night because there's like heavy banging from the furnace. Or maybe it's a stranger. I don't know. It's hard to tell with this apartment. But getting into the reflections, the first realization that I had was navigating change is harder when you're resistant to let things go and also resistant to accepting new realities and new experiences. I'm thinking back to like 2 hours ago when I was just putting myself down because the lighting setup just wouldn't look exactly like our old lighting setup. And I know it's obvious because we're in a new space that the lighting, of course, wouldn't look exactly the same. But I think it feels really discouraging because everything is changing all at once. And even looking at the screen right now, the framing and the lighting all feels so different. And I know it's very hard to capture the same essence of what the podcast was in the past. But I think also when I linger on things like making sure the lighting looks exactly the same, that ends up restricting me from exploring new possibilities with lighting. Like I could maybe change the color a little bit. I could maybe put lights in different spots. I could set up the space a little bit differently. And I think that's one of the things that I realized on top of just 2 hours ago, having spent quite a bit of time trying to set everything up the same way. I also think in other patterns of my life, when I'm not willing to let go of how things used to be, I have a hard time envisioning how things will be. So I think that's the first realization. I also have been experiencing this in just so many parts of my life because of the change. One, in the neighborhood, in my habits and like where I place things nowadays. Like the home is just so different and like the layout of things is so different. But something that hit me so hard the last 2 weeks is my incredible sadness and fear of missing things. And so I've had a lot of guilt about leaving the apartment because I miss it so much. And I think I'm internalizing this longing for what was my home and manifesting it as an inability to see the light and like other things in my life. But I think I'm slowly getting over that hurdle. And I think it is important to recognize when you're stopping yourself from like experiencing new things and enjoying new things because you miss the old things too much. I think for me, I've been grieving this sense of home and belonging for the last couple of weeks. And the moment we moved into the new home, I had this little crisis where I was like, oh my God, I don't feel like I have somewhere to come home to because all we have are like boxes lying around the home and I don't know where things are. It just is very hard to feel comfortable when there's such sudden change in life. But I think this is just a very natural part of change. Like any form of change in life, there's going to be a sense of loss and a sense of having to readapt and a sense of, oh my God, I feel so much remorse for like either initiating the change or being the one who has to go through change. And I think it's a very natural part of life, which is the other point that I wanted to make. I think as much as I feel so burdened by all the new things that are going on in life, I also think change is necessary for growth. And I've learned so much about myself the last few weeks just going through the emotions and having to go through the motions of like shuffling things around, making decisions again about where to fit my life into these different nooks of my apartment. But I realized it was very hard for me to go through the move because I wasn't really open to the idea of other parts of my life changing beyond the location. So I wasn't really thinking about routine changes and lifestyle changes and behavioral changes and all the things that came with it. I think truly change is the best when you're open to growing from it. And like I mentioned, I've learned so much about myself in the last few weeks, having to navigate differences in my life. And I feel like as a person, I've learned so much about my behaviors and my reactions to things shifting in my life and how I think about my long-term goals in relation to where I am in life. And I think there's so much growth that comes from change, whether it is positive or negative. I really do think it is such a core part of us in learning about ourselves. Like one of the things that I learned about myself is I tend to be a little bit impulsive. So with the move especially, I feel like I really dove into it because I had this idea of what I wanted out of the move and what the move would provide for us. Space obviously was a big reason that we wanted to move out, but beyond that, I really didn't give myself time to think. I think in the past I've been a little bit impulsive. James, my boyfriend, can probably attest to that. Like in the past, I've had spontaneous moments where I wanted to adopt a hamster. And so we went out and got a hamster at some point in college. But there's moments where I feel like I've been impulsive in the past. And with this move especially, I feel like I didn't give myself enough time to process and think before it. And so that was one of the realizations that I had. The second realization that I had in this process, which if we're going really deep into my personal thoughts, I realized that I tend to underestimate the effort it takes to make big leaps in my life. And so with the move, I really forgot how much work it was to move in the past. And so I kind of like leapt into it because it was something that I felt like would be seamless. Like we would just fill up some boxes, bring it over, unpack, and then we'd be settled in a week. And I feel like that sounds so naive now that I say it, but in my head, it really was such a quick, decisive thought for me to be like, oh yeah, we're gonna settle in very quickly. And I think going through these experiences really opened me up to the idea of reflecting more critically on parts of my personality that don't get shown very often. So on the topic of like impulsive decisions, I don't really do that. I don't really have that many opportunities to make impulsive decisions nowadays. And so I think this was one critical learning experience that I made some reflections about myself, about my impulsiveness. And I think that was really the tone of this whole 3 weeks that we've been through, which is learning and growing from these new challenges in life. The second realization that I had is that change is just a natural part of the process and part of the journey of life. And as much as I am a planner and I love to have things in check and know exactly how things are going to play out, most of the time we can't plan for everything. And just in general, I think things go off script so often. Like most times when I do something, it is never perfectly on script. And I really do think, though, that's the point of it, because if we knew what was going to happen in life, then it would be less exciting and there would be less journeys and less avenues to take if you already had a semblance of every single path that you're going to go down. And so I think there's a lot of beauty in things going off script. Sometimes it can be a little bit overwhelming and sometimes it can be something negative. But I do think about the butterfly effect often, where one thing happening will spawn a series of other things happening. And usually it just leads you down a path that you're very content and happy with in any case. And so I think the life lesson there is that it's okay when things don't go as expected. The next realization that I had is maybe more of a critique of society, but I do think we need to stop normalizing things being perfect and being able to bounce back from change very quickly. And I see this very often with celebrities when they get pregnant and they have a child and then they give birth and then suddenly they have six-pack abs again. And it reminds me of the discourse that women, like normal women, have around pregnancy, which is it's very hard to bounce back from pregnancy. Like it takes months, sometimes years for your body to go back to the way that it was. And I feel like through celebrities and other social figures, there's almost this idea that you should be back to normal within a couple of weeks, which is absolutely ridiculous. I also think from being online, I realized a little bit of my sense of overwhelm came from the fact that I expected things to go smoothly and to settle in as soon as possible and very quickly, actually, because I've been seeing other people move recently too. And for everyone, it seems like such a simple process. And I think that was kind of what muddled my personal thoughts around my move process too. Because actually, I was seeing a lot of people go through a similar move and settle in almost immediately. But I constantly need to remind myself, and a gentle reminder for you guys, if any of you are going through change, is that everyone's situation is different. And also social media is the highlights reel most of the time for most people. And for me, I just had to remember that I still work a job, so I do have to show up every day for my job. And I also have a podcast that I'm very committed to putting out weekly episodes for. And I'm also trying to document my process on my main YouTube channel too. And so as much as I want to give time to settling in and making things more comfortable and navigating change as quickly as I can, there are other commitments in life and other parts of my life that maybe other people don't experience too. And that's okay. And I think it's okay to take things one step at a time, one day at a time. There's no rush ever in life that is, well, usually there's no rush that's imposed by other people. I think it is very easy to be hard on ourselves, to have to fix things as soon as possible, to have to resolve any issues that come up as soon as possible, and just to be perfect all the time. But in my opinion, if you're someone who has a lot going on in life, it's just unrealistic for you to navigate change seamlessly. And so that's just a gentle reminder for myself and other people who might be going through change. So once I got over this crazy expectation of settling in within 2 weeks, I started to slowly find the joys in the process I'm going through. And so small things make me very excited, and like new things make me very excited. And so every day I'm finding new joys in life. One of it is Moose likes to run across the apartment, and now that it's actually bigger, he can sprint back and forth without having to like hop onto furniture. He is really discovering how fast he can be, and he's so cute when he does it. But I think there's just small things every day that I'm realizing and being able to appreciate and find joy in. And so that's the other thing, is once you get over kind of the burdens of change, you start to allow yourself to enjoy parts of it and to find the small things that make you happy and like the glimmers of like new experiences and new joys in life. So this last part of the podcast is going to be about leaning into change and accepting challenges and learning to grow from it. I always try to end these podcasts on a happy note. And I think one of the things that I scribbled down when I was reflecting on this whole process, which now looking back sounds a little bit cringy, but I still want to share because maybe there's a glimmer of a life lesson in there. I wrote down, when life gives you moldy lemons, you can take the seeds out and still plant it into a tree. And I think that's correct. I think basically, as cringy as that sounded, I wanted to get to the point of when things don't go as you expected and when there's new challenges with whatever is presented to you. For example, if your lemons that you got are moldy, you don't always have to go down the conventional route of problem solving, and there's maybe new experiences and new things that can come out of having this challenge or facing adversity, going through change that might result in a different outcome than you expected. An even better outcome, it could be just a different outcome. And all in all, there's almost always a solution or a path you can go down when you go through change. And so, yeah, I just wanted to say that there's sometimes a non-obvious solution and maybe an even more fruitful way to learn and grow from. But the one caveat, because we love caveats and disclaimers on this podcast, is sometimes the lemons you get are just not salvageable. And it's okay also for the change to not result in that much growth and not result in something new and a new opportunity. But I do think there is just maybe a glimmer of a life lesson somewhere in those moments. But yeah, I just wanted to say that it is not always that you can make lemonade or a lemon tree out of lemons. I think my lemon tree for this whole period of change and the challenges that are coming out of it is I'm actually looking forward to the process of renovating the apartment a little bit, because when we moved in, there were just so many little things and components that needed a little bit of work. And I know it will maybe delay the process a little bit to kind of fix a lot of the things in our apartment. But I've always loved fixing up things and home decor and furnishing a home. And I've always been a little bit of a crafty person too. So I'm actually very excited to see what this like home renovation journey looks like for us, and also just generally building out a home. But I think putting into words this whole positive thinking mindset that I always preach on the podcast is maybe the term cognitive reframing. So looking at these new experiences and challenges in a different light and kind of reframing your approach and your outlook on it. And I think that is what I'm trying to do. The other thing that I've kind of learned is I like to hold on to the past a lot. And on the podcast, you guys probably know that I talk about the past a lot because I feel like there's a lot of things to learn from the past. But I also think letting go of what went wrong and allowing yourself to move forward is a big step when it comes to navigating change. And I'm starting to learn how to stop thinking about what went wrong in the past and focus on what can go right in the future. And I think that's a huge, huge part and a huge milestone too, as a person, to kind of let go of when things go wrong and learning how to look ahead. And I think all of us, we're all just like trudging along in our little paths, whether or not it's clear what the path is or unclear what the path is. It's important to continue moving forward. Basically, the point I wanted to drive at is you have to keep moving forward. You have to keep your head high and you have to keep going, because at the end of the day, you're responsible for how things turn out for yourself. And even if life beats you down and there's certain experiences that you're going through that are suboptimal, it's so important that you stick to what you know is in store for you in the future and to just keep moving forward. So that is what I wanted to say in today's episode. And if you're someone who just moved like me, I hope your move went smoothly and a little bit less chaotically than mine. But if you're going through change or you know that change is on the horizon, I hope this episode helped. Thank you guys so much from the bottom of my heart for tuning in. I appreciate each and every one of you guys who shows up every week. And this podcast would be nothing without you guys. You guys are my favorite people on the internet and I love this community so much. So just wanted to reiterate how much I appreciate you guys, and I hope to see you next week for our next Soju Friday. Have a good weekend. Bye.